PCCW is a Hong Kong-based company that holds a majority interest in HKT, the Hong Kong's premier telecommunications service provider, and also owns a fully integrated multimedia and entertainment group. Welcome on the stage, the Senior Vice President, Business Strategy Consulting and Solutions at PCCW, Mr. Atreya Chaganty.
Good afternoon. Well, I want to start off with two things. First, the slightly boring part. I know most of you have probably not heard of PCCW, barring the last 10 seconds of introduction. I was asked to keep the company spiel quite short, so I'm really going to do that. I fear that if I don't give you a context to PCCW, I might just lose you in the time that I have. So very briefly, PCCW is a group holding company, as the introduction said. We own a telecom operator in Hong Kong and Greater China and larger parts of Asia, US, and Europe. We own an IPTV business, which is our media company. And we have operations broadly in about 16 countries globally, including Europe and in the US. And a large part of it is also Asia-based. And we also have a technology services business, which runs predominantly in the Hong Kong, Greater China market, but we are actively expanding into Western Europe as well as the US. I represent and I run the corporate strategy as well as the M&A business for the company, and it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be able to share with you a couple of ideas, thoughts, as well as experiences that we have gained working in the connected commerce space with our customers. So that's the first part. The second part is I really want to spend the time that I have been allotted to really transport you, give or take about 9,000 kilometers. So come with me, because that's broadly the distance between Sofia and Beijing. And what I want to do is to be able to spend some time giving you a snapshot in the context of what we are seeing in that part of the world. To put China into context, I'd just like to say that China is big by most measures. How big? If you look at its GDP in terms of US dollars, broadly about 11 trillion US dollar economy, second right after the US. It's definitely a global manufacturing hub. That's what we all associated with it with. But often underlooked in public media is the rapidly consumer-driven services growth that is happening right under our noses. Within the services sector, we have retail, which is a large part of what I want to spend my time about. And retail today is broadly about a 1/3 part of the country's economy. If you want to put that into context, we're talking of somewhere around 3.5 to 4 trillion US dollars in market size, which is second to US, which is the world's largest retail market, broadly give or take at about 4.5 trillion US dollars. E-commerce as part of retail has seen phenomenal growth. We've heard some of the previous speakers talk about various aspects that contribute in some way or form towards a large part of this growth. In China, this growth actually has very different scale and a very different meaning. The graph that you see here broadly shows in the last 5 to 6 years, the compounded annual growth rate that e-commerce as an industry has experienced is somewhere between 46 to 50%. It's expected to slow down to about 30% by 2018, by which we are expecting that to be about a 1.6 trillion US dollar subsector in size. So 1.6 trillion US dollars of e-commerce and about $3.5 to $4 trillion of retail space. If you want to understand what those numbers mean, in 2018, if you take World Bank's forecast and you rank the countries by their GDP forecast, China's retail sector alone will be the world's 3rd largest economy, and its e-commerce sector will be the 16th largest economy. So these numbers are pretty big. What's also interesting is the relative contribution of e-commerce to retail. As you can see in the numbers below, by far, compared to most of the other countries where retail and e-commerce have a significant contribution to their GDP, e-commerce in China today contributes approximately 15 to 16%. It's expected to be about 1/3 of that contribution in the next 2 to 3 years. So we are talking about fairly material numbers here. If you look at some of the underlying technologies that are enabling this growth, communications is a critical enabler. Again, we had lots of speakers talk about the effect of mobile technologies and the effect of communications. Numbers, again, speak quite a lot of magnitude here. In the 2009 to 2014 period, we saw roughly doubling the number of fixed broadband connections at about 200 million. The number of mobile subscribers is broadly at about 1.3 billion. Approximately 650 to 700 million of those are expected to be smartphone users. What's perhaps more interesting and more relevant to the current context is the graph on the right side, which talks about the volume of Wechat users. Wechat, if you're not aware of what it is China's WhatsApp. It's essentially this instant messaging platform. But it's actually a lot more than WhatsApp. It's a lot more than Facebook messaging as well. It's essentially a platform which is run through an app on mobile or connected devices, and it's an app within an app, which basically means that companies and customers and users can create their own application within the instant messaging application. And those have very, very interesting consequences in terms of potential. As countries become rich, and we've seen this quite clearly in most of the rich countries and many of the emerging markets, there is a gradual shift in what people are spending their money on. So we find that increasingly citizens and consumers spend less money on necessities, which includes food, but a significant amount of disposable income actually gets translated into the so-called non-necessities. These are buying cars, ordering food home because you don't want to cook or you're too busy working. This is going to the movies, going to operas, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially, recreation and non-necessities increasingly consume a larger part of your disposable income. And we see the shift happening very, very predominantly in China. The Chinese consumer preferences in terms of how they buy is also undergoing a very, very rapid change. And this is broadly driven by a couple of factors. One is the availability of very inexpensive as well as low-price items. So basically, Chinese consumers are one of the most frugal and most price-sensitive customers in any large market of its size, and that's playing very well because the growth is actually fueling a lot of price competition. The second is a necessity for convenience. Chinese consumers are notoriously finicky about how they want to buy, and anything that drives convenience, such as 24/7 shopping, plays quite nicely into the characteristics of buying behavior. And the third, just as we see elsewhere, including the screens that are constantly showing the Twitter feed of today's event, social media has a huge influence in how people buy. So what's really happening to what we understand as the traditional brick-and-mortar operation, so the traditional format of retail stores? Well, as this graph shows, there is definitely a decline. But bear in mind that the decline that we see in terms of 8% growth, which is the bar on the right-hand side, is actually on a base of about $3.5 trillion. So yes, it's growing relatively, but we're still talking pretty large numbers. There are also a couple of emerging factors that are putting pressure on the traditional brick-and-mortar store operators. For example, today, 90% of the operating expenses of these companies, the traditional store companies, is going towards wages, labor cost primarily, and rental. And wage escalation is increasingly becoming a challenge for Chinese manufacturers and producers. The second, of course, is that like any basic strategy, when your business model is under threat, you tend to respond either by adapting or adopting. So you find today many of the largest multi-billion-dollar brick-and-mortar companies in China having their own online stores or web presence, pretty much exactly what we see in most of the other markets, for example. So this essentially then brings us to the point where it might seem that on one side we have the emerging, extremely hyper-growth initiated e-commerce online segment kind of colliding with the more traditional brick-and-mortar segment, which is the conventional retail that we understand. But the work that we have done with our Chinese customers and the Asian customers in the last 3 to 4 years gives a very different picture. And the picture really is what this title talks about, and that is O plus O equals connected commerce, which simply to us means online and offline come together to create the future world of connected commerce. Now, if you just pause on that for a moment, it might seem somehow blazingly obvious in the sense that if you have two markets of this size, they're both reasonably relative to each other, growing healthily. Yes, one is growing much faster than the other, as I said, but they're still respectable market sizes in their own sense. Conventional strategy would say you don't necessarily need to change much. And you can be happy with wherever you are. But the fact is that the consumer preferences and the consumer buying behavior is dictating a lot of what we are beginning to see as the integration between these two business models. This is broadly the theme I want to explore in the remaining part of the time in this presentation. Perhaps the most important element of this integration of the two business models that are coming together is what I have tried to highlight at the bottom, which is the necessity to have a very consistent, seamless, and integrated experience. One thing that customers and consumers, and I'm pretty sure all of us have experienced that somewhere in our own buying transactions, I suppose, is we don't like bad experiences. By bad experiences, I mean either customers not getting what they want, being asked to provide the same information again, inability to be able to get the product when you want it, not at the right price. I buy online, it's cheaper, exactly the same store, the same brand, the same SKU in store probably costs more. Why should I pay more when I'm standing in your store, et cetera, et cetera. So there are many of these scenarios that we have all experienced that cause a huge sense of irritation, and hence the necessity for seamless integrated experience is vital. At the same time, I think it's quite important every time we talk about the massive rise of the Chinese online world, the Chinese e-commerce behemoths, it does not necessarily imply, and it certainly does not indicate, if you operate in those markets, that the traditional store format providers are going away. So the concept that offline is dead, certainly for China, is far from reality. The Chinese context around O2O is something similar in terms of their adoption levels that I've spoken about already. There's an interesting study in terms of the effects of digital display that stores have, that an academic study did. Essentially shows that when you put these big LCD format screens physically in store, there is a 14% uplift in the number of SKUs that you tend to buy, while there's a 17% revenue uplift. That's basically an increase of 17% in your sales orders. Now, this is just a small example of how companies are using digital technologies inside their store to be able to understand the digital experiences. There are a couple of various examples. I'm running short on time here, but if I skip forward to what exactly is the outcome of some of the customer behavior in the last couple of years, you find from this graph that the effect of things such as electronic coupons, quick response codes, personalized messages that you tend to get in your mobile connected devices, proximity-based offers, many of these concepts that tend to bring the offline and the online world closer together, enabled by connected devices and technologies, adoption of those technologies is far ahead in China when you compare to the rest of the global averages. And this is pretty good and healthy because this primarily implies that increasing investments in these technologies is going to enable both sides of the companies on the spectrum. So what does the future hold? Well, I'm going to be pretty quick on this because it's always fun to take a punt on the future, but I think we're seeing increasing levels of consolidation as well as cross-investments. So for example, the online companies like the behemoths, Alibaba and the JD.com and the others, they have increased the level of investments into traditional brick and store format providers, and many of them are to the tune of 5 to 7 billion US dollars. Second, there is an expectation of significant second stage of growth to come from the untapped market, and this is primarily the 46 to 50% of Chinese customers who are still in the rural locations. Many of their needs have been unmet, but in terms of the mobility and the technology access that they have, this is an aspirational society that is pretty eager to consume, and this is expected to drive the next wave of humongous growth. As I said, some of the largest M&A transactions are happening right under our noses in China. Just a small example, Uber's two largest competitors, Didi and Kuwaiti, recently engaged in a merger, which is estimated at about $6 billion. Meituan and Dianping, two companies that are broadly in the yellow pages Yelp business, if you may, they entered into a merger which is approximately $12 billion in size. So these are very, very material transactions that are beginning to happen as the market begins to consolidate. I think these are very early days. As I said, our experience really is quite nascent, but what we are beginning to learn is omni-channel experience is critical, and in the sense that seamless and integrated experience across channels is a vital contributing factor to customer satisfaction. So we are constantly looking for technologies and business strategies that enable that for both sides of the retail providers. I think it's probably blatantly obvious again to say, but which channel we develop has primarily to be done based on customer preferences and not necessarily in terms of what you think should really happen. So we find this to be very much the truth in China. And finally, from an operational perspective, we are constantly advising our own clients not to look at these as disconnected businesses. These are not necessarily silos of operations, but these really have to be looked at as a single cohesive business. Although their KPIs and performance measures are very different today, and I'm sure you might probably relate this if you are part of this industry in your own businesses, but we encourage customers and retailers to look at this as an integrated business, because ultimately customers don't care whether it's your online business or your offline business. They are looking for a single and integrated experience. So how do we run our businesses differently from the way customers perceive it? This, I believe, is really going to be I guess, the true measure of success in the next coming years. Thanks very much. I think I'm pretty woefully out of time, so I'm around for the rest of the day, so if you want, you can come and grab me for any questions. Thank you.